Welcome everyone. My name is Butch Porter and welcome to Great Conversations. I'm here with Scott Hamberger, who is the CEO of Fortessa.
Fortessa Tableware
I'm sorry,
Solutions.
Integrus Holdings.
Integrus Holdings is the proper corporate name.
When I met Scott,
you should know that.
It's
on the building.
It is on the building. When I first met Scott, it was Fortessa.
That's true.
And since then, he's grown in leaps and bounds, and we're here in One Loudon. And you've been here a year, right?
A year in July, so a year and 2 months or so. It's been great. We love it. It's a fantastic location. We've been able to accomplish most of the strategic goals that we had when we moved.
Right.
Employees love it. Our customers love it. We've had more meetings in this showroom in the last year than we had in the previous 5 in our old building in Sterling. So,
yeah, Sterling Restaurant Supply is the sister
Sterling
company of
Restaurant
Fortessa.
Supply. Quick plug for Sterling Restaurant Supply because everybody is a potential customer.
That's right.
Sterling Restaurant
That's
Supply.
right. Because they have a retail shop now.
Well, if you're looking for professional quality tableware for your home, Butch.
You know the
right
purpose of this conversation, Scott.
I understand.
I'm just kidding. No,
I understand.
I'm perfectly fine with the plugs, man. I'm just giving you a hard time.
This is part of corporate responsibility, Butch.
It is part of corporate
Because
responsibility.
I am trying to deliver high quality products to consumers that make their lives better, that help them enjoy life in the ways they want to enjoy life.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation was I saw a video of yours. When was that? Was it 10 years ago or earlier than that?
Yeah, on the order of 10 years ago anyway.
10-ish.
Yeah.
Scott did a video on corporate social responsibility.
That's right.
And we hear that term a lot, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
people use that term a lot. It's been used for many years, and Scott's take on it, you know, it was one of those, like, I heard the first 90 seconds and started doing this slow clap thing.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I figured that maybe we could expand that 90 seconds and talk a little more about it and what it means to you. And
Sure. So, number one, as an affirmed capitalist, I believe that social responsibility of business is a very important thing. And many times people talk about social responsibility in business as if they're in some sort of tension, as if businesses don't really want to be socially responsible, but against their nature, you know, somehow they can be coerced or trained into social responsibility.
They compromise, right?
And there is no compromise.
Right.
I would say that it is inherently in the interest of a business to be socially responsible.
Sure.
And I would say that the business community sits at the intersection of enlightened self-interest and the common good.
Sure.
And I would further say that a good business, well managed, is a social good. So to talk about that in more concrete terms, if we think about what it is we're trying to build in a company, certainly we're trying to build long-term value, no question about it.
Sure.
If you think about your own life and you think about your personal brand, your reputation is a critical part of that. Your reputation governs how people look at you, governs how people interact with you, governs the degree of trust that people will extend you in any facet of life.
Sure.
In many respects, you know, it's interesting given some of the political landscape, in many respects, corporations have a personality to them.
Well, sure, because they're human beings, right? That's a
well, they're not human beings. They're legal beings, of course.
the people running the companies are human beings.
Indeed.
It's like when we talk about government, right? The people running the government are usually human beings. They make mistakes just like the rest
You're
of us.
absolutely right. And reducing people to a faceless, dehumanized class of people
has consequences.
It has consequences. It has consequences in conversation. It has consequences in debate. And I know a big part of what you're trying to do with these great conversations is to address that and to foster more civil discourse. And without a doubt, part of fostering more civil discourse means interacting with people as individuals, interacting with people as fellow humans who have their own challenges, their own issues in life, understanding that and respecting that, as opposed to dehumanizing people and lumping them into a nameless, faceless class of
big
people.
this or big that. Right. Like there's some, you know, faceless monsters, alien invaders from outer space that decided to take over whatever. Are you considered big tableware? Is that a big? Is that where you are? Are you big tableware?
Well, you know,
you're not to me. You're Scott. You're Scott Hamberger.
Yeah, we're trying to take over the world one tabletop
one
at a time.
One tabletop at a time.
You've
it's a good
found
idea.
my evil plan.
Right.
But in any event, the point that we were discussing is
Sure.
that to a certain degree, corporations have a personality.
Sure, yeah.
And corporate reputation is as critical in the context of a corporation's future as it is in the context of an individual's future.
Sure.
And so from that perspective, being responsible, being a good corporate citizen is inherently in the interest of the organization.
Right, and at its basic level, having a successful business that's profitable and pays their employees well, provides good value to the customers, that in itself is...
So if you think about adding value, and if you think about what it is a company does, you know, in a sort of a pyramid, where at the bottom are the very basic things, you know, which really could be considered...
Needs hierarchy kind of thing.
Which really could be considered table stakes to exist, and you think about the more intangible things at the top of the pyramid.
Sure.
You know, when we talk about corporate responsibility, many times we're talking about those intangibles at the top of the pyramid. To your point, it's critical to understand the base of the pyramid.
Right.
The first duty of a company is to make money. I'm not saying to make money at any means. I'm not saying to make money at any social cost. But the fact is that a business that does not generate a profit is of no good to anybody and will not be in business.
It's not going to be there much longer.
So
right?
when we talk about some of the more lofty ambitions and goals from a social responsibility perspective, we have to maintain the context that if the base of the pyramid is not in place, and if the company does not generate earnings, which can be reinvested in the future of the business, which can be invested in social or corporate responsibility programs, the whole thing falls apart. Another point of that, and this has a bearing on social responsibility, is a business that doesn't make money does so because it doesn't generate value. In other words, people aren't willing to pay for what it does, and the cost of the value that it adds exceeds what people are willing to pay for that value.
Sure.
And if you think about it, this is one of the most fundamental aspects of social responsibility of business. We exist to provide people with things that they need, with things that they want, with things that they aspire to. And if you think about a transaction, when you're buying something, you are pulling money out of your wallet, and you know exactly what that money's worth.
That's right.
You sweated and you worked hard to earn that money. And you're taking that instrument of value and you're exchanging it to get something back from the counterparty. So in the case of a business, you're paying for a service, you're paying for a product because you perceive that it adds value in your life, it meets a need that you have, or it helps you accomplish a goal or objective. So at the most basic level, part of the social responsibility of business is to provide people with a good, fair exchange that gives them things that they need. Again, that's really table stakes. You know, that's the most
No
basic
pun intended.
part. It is. It's the most basic part of being in business. And if you don't get that right, none of the rest of it matters. But in doing that, I would argue that the business is inherently doing something good for society because by definition, society values what it is the business is doing or it would be out of business.
Or it would be out of business. You know, so do you feel like a lot of corporations, and especially in the United States, but that we hear about in the news when they talk about social responsibility, do you feel like they look at it quite differently?
Well, we just agreed that we would not talk about people in nameless, faceless, faceless broad
but just
categories.
in general.
So
but in general, do you feel like
I think it's very. First of all, when you talk about businesses that you read about in the newspaper, you are already talking about a certain group of businesses that have certain characteristics, or they typically wouldn't be in the newspaper anyway. We have to remember, and let's take Loudoun County here as a good example. Let's take the Chamber of Commerce, in which both you and I have been quite active over the years, as a good example. The vast majority by number of the businesses in the Loudoun County Chamber of Commerce are small business.
Very small, right.
Though it was certainly true years ago when I was more active as the chair. I'm sure it's still
that long ago, Scott.
Okay, 2015.
That's right.
I'm sure it's still true today. The largest group of businesses by number were small home-based
businesses, like a third at least.
So we have to remember that when we're talking about businesses, by and large, the majority of businesses in this country that employ the majority of people who are employed in this country are in fact small to mid-sized businesses. And I think the drivers of small to mid-sized businesses tend to be a bit different than the larger more typically publicly traded companies that you would read about in the newspaper.
Well, sure. Do you feel
But
like
what I will say, and answer your question, if the question is, in general, do you think that businesses in the United States engage in socially responsible behavior? Absolutely.
Sure.
Because just fundamentally, they wouldn't
be in business if they weren't.
if they didn't.
So your argument is that they may be spending a lot of time talking about this stuff here, but actually they're doing a really good job down here, which is the important part of social responsibility.
I think,
anyway,
I think if you reflect upon your day-to-day experience, the people that you interact with in a business setting every day, you think about the great things that businesses provide to their customers, to their employees, and to their vendors every day. It's a marvelous system, and it works quite well.
right.
So again, I go back to the notion that a good business, well managed, is inherently a social good.
No, I believe that. So how do you, from a leadership standpoint, and in hiring people, how is it that you differentiate yourself? I actually had a conversation with, speaking of the Chamber of Commerce, with the workforce education crowd, and a lot of time is spent on helping people who are looking for a job find a good job. In this market, we've almost gotten to the point where, especially in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia, job market is actually, the labor market is actually pretty tight, right? I mean, I don't know what our unemployment rate is in Northern Virginia now, but
Well,
it's
obviously,
low.
nationally it's 3.8%.
That's actually too low, right? In a way, right?
It's too low, and unless you're the one getting the raise.
Unless you're the one getting the
In
raise.
which case, it's a good thing. I believe in capitalism, believe in free markets. The labor market is certainly one of those free markets, and I think it's great
Right.
that people are having the opportunity to increase their earnings after a period of some significant stagnation. If we know anything about the free market, we know that we will figure it out. We know that we will continue to find ways to increase productivity. We'll continue to find ways to grow our business and to continue to provide opportunities for employees.
Yeah, and speaking of the small businesses, though, my point is that what it does, it puts the constraint in the other direction. So small businesses like mine and others, the challenge is finding good people now because they feel like they feel like there's so many opportunities, so much opportunity. They just kind of, so it's harder to find and keep good people now. I have conversations on a daily basis with friends of mine who run businesses here, and I think from a leadership standpoint, we all could use good advice on how to better manage that, to better lead on that idea.
Let's go back to the topic of the personality of a company.
Sure.
And you've heard the term corporate culture.
Sure.
And I would argue that corporate culture is that corporate personality.
Sure.
There's a great phrase that one of our board members uses, which I shamelessly borrow from her, which is, culture eats strategy for lunch every day.
That's really good.
So if you think
That's
about,
really
it's true. And if you think about strategy and strategic goals and vision and killer instincts in the marketplace, or whatever it is you
all
want
those
to think
sorts
about,
of things, right?
if you don't have great people, and if you don't have a great culture in which those people are operating, none of the rest of it matters. So I would say first and foremost, if you're thinking about how do I bring great people into the organization, how do I develop those people, how do I retain those people, creating a world-class corporate culture is the best way to do it. And generally speaking, culture is what differentiates a mediocre organization from a great organization, or a great organization from a mediocre organization.
So when you're talking about bringing people into that culture, how do you know, because we were talking about, we're individuals more than we're corporations, faceless corporations. So do you feel like,
well, I think you need a true north. I mean, how do you know if
when
someone fits into that?
When the values differ, right? When the values are, when your values are something completely different than the boss's values, you both speak the same language, live in the same county, the whole thing, but you have a different set of values.
So you need a true north,
right?
So, and part
so
of
an
that,
objective.
I don't know if it's objective or not, because we're talking about values, and we could talk for 30 minutes about whether values are objective or not.
Maybe next time.
But certainly for us, that true north is our values, and we created our values, which are leadership, integrity, loyalty, and innovation. We created our values to solve a problem problem was, and this was, gosh, 12 or more years ago,
Okay.
when my brother and I started the company, it was the two of us, and we did everything. We would go out in the morning and write orders. We would go back to the warehouse and pack boxes or drive the trucks to deliver those orders in the afternoon, and then we'd sleep on the fold-out couch in the warehouse and get up and do it again the next day.
Sure.
So when it was just the two of us, we knew exactly what our values were. And you go along and you go along, you hire some people.
Right.
You hire those people, you train them, you make the hiring decision, you transmit the culture of the corporation to them directly.
Right.
And you go along and you go along, and suddenly one day we realized that the business had grown to a size where we were no longer hiring people directly. We were no longer training people directly.
Oh, sure.
We were no longer training the people who were training the people that they had hired.
Right. Right.
So you then come to a point where you say, okay, to the degree that we've been successful as an organization, what is it that has made us successful?
Sure.
And how do we define that? And how do we ensure that that is passed on as a framework within the organization?
So what were the four again?
Leadership, loyalty, integrity, and innovation.
Loyalty is so, I mean, that's not something that you always hear.
No, it is not.
Integrity, everybody says integrity, no offense, but everybody says integrity.
Everyone says integrity.
Right, right. But loyalty
They
is...
probably mean it in different ways. And
They may.
It's a rich word.
Absolutely. Integrus Holdings is...
And that's why Integrus Holdings is called Integrus Holdings, because integrity is one of our
But
core
loyalty,
values.
talk about that for a sec.
Loyalty, everybody wants loyalty, right? Everybody
sure.
wants loyal customers. Everybody wants loyal
Employees. And loyal CEOs.
Loyalty has to be earned.
Right.
And so we focus on loyalty because we believe very much that we have to continue to win the loyalty of our customers, the loyalty
You have to
of
continually
our
earn
team,
it.
continually earn it, win
Right.
it.
Right.
And one of the things that that we are fond of saying in the context of our company is the most valuable thing that you have in life is your personal store of human capital. What's that? It's the God-given talents that you were born with.
Sure.
It's the educational opportunities that you pursued. It's the skill sets that you have won for yourself over your life. Those assets are yours, inalienably. Nobody can take them away from you other than by way of enslavement.
Inalienable is a good word.
It is a good word. So as you think about your life,
Right.
you should be intentional about how you choose to deploy that store of human capital. And the last piece of your human capital is your time.
Right.
The limited time that you have on this earth. So we encourage people, be intentional. Think about how you are spending your time and your talents and where. And our view is that we have to create an environment where it is worthwhile for you to make that intentional decision to be here and to be with us, which means that we need to create for you an environment where you have personal and professional opportunities characterized by integrity. If we do that, you'll be loyal because we've earned your loyalty by the way in which we behave and by the way in which we act. With regard to customers, we are proud to have many of the same customers today that we had 25 years ago when we started the business. And that's because we perform and we do what we say and we earn that loyalty. So loyalty can sometimes be a blind trust. It can sometimes be a virtue that is taken to extremes. Look no further than omerta. Look no further than any street gang. It's all about loyalty and only loyalty. So it can be a unidimensional virtue. We think about it
paired with integrity. It makes a lot more sense.
And we think about it in the context of something that's constantly earned. It's a form of trust.
Yeah, and it comes back to when the employees have that sort of stability and that trust and that loyalty from you, which and it's kind of it goes both ways. Then it gives them the opportunities to be generous in their communities as well. I think it's one of the things you pointed out in the videos.
For sure.
That your employees have they can take those time and that energy and their resources and help in their communities as individuals as well.
Well, earlier you talked about a hierarchical Maslow's hierarchy, for example. One of the things that we have to remember is that many of the conversations that we have about social responsibility, about corporate responsibility, people wanting to volunteer time,
Sure.
donate treasure. These all take place within a very particular context.
Well, sure.
And that context is a wealthy society. We have to remember that until one has the ability to think about more than one's next meal and to think about more than food, clothing, and shelter for the next day or the next week, none of the rest of these things matter.
Yeah, charity is not a high priority if you're.
Well, it's
worried
not a
about-
coincidence that the environmental movement started in the United States really in Teddy Roosevelt's time.
Sure.
What was going on? What was the historical context? The historical context was that we had had the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
The historical context was that people had, by and large, risen out of poverty. Education had become more and more attainable, and people had the ability to look around and say, wait a second, I can think about more than my daily bread. I
Sure.
can start thinking about the world in a broader context. So it's not a coincidence that environmentalism started after wealth had been created.
Right.
It's not a coincidence that we're having these conversations, which are incredibly valuable, about the good that we can do in the world. But what we have to recognize is that our ability to do that good in the world is to a certain degree a luxury that is afforded to us by the standard of living and the wealth that we have.
Sure.
And we forget that at our peril.
Yes, we do.
Because if we do not continue to do the things that protect that standard of living and give us the resources to spend our time, to spend
Right.
our money, to spend our energy on doing good, then we won't be able to do it. So something to remember from a contextual point of view, and it goes back
Sure.
to your point, which is if we create an environment of economic stability where people can count on and be confident in the future of the business, the future of their employment, based on the solidity of the business, then we can also have the context in which we can start talking about how we can do more good in the community around us and how we can take company assets and deploy them and company resources and deploy them to do things that are being done largely for the sake of the fact that they're good. And
Right,
by
right.
the way, they reflect well on the company, they enhance the company's reputation,
Well, sure.
they increase the value of the employment proposition. So it is an enlightened self-interest, to be sure.
Sure.
But we can do it in the first place because we have the economic base on which to do it.
Yeah, it's funny to me that and we've kind of alluded to it, but when you hear the term, corporate social responsibility, a lot of times we have a tendency to forget the sort of basics, kind of what you were getting to. So, one other thing, so when people talk about reflecting their values in the workplace, do you feel like sometimes there's too much of a focus on the prescriptive versus the proscriptive of, our values are not just simply what we were supposed to do for mankind and each other. There's also an element of what, we shouldn't do, from a moral and a standpoint. Do you feel like that, and the details aren't important, but do you feel like that's kind of where the sort of the challenge lies between people when we talk about, don't, keep your religion at home, check it at the door, for most of us, our religion is our morals, our values. It's how we navigate our world. It's how we choose to interact with the people around us. And I think what's concerning to me is sometimes we're told, yeah, we want your charity, we want you to care about the world, we want your social responsibility, we want the environmental awareness, we want all that. But anything that doesn't fit that sort of modern zeitgeist of what is good and proper morals and values, anything that might be more specific or more religiously oriented, that you have to check that at the door, So what do you feel like the challenge? I mean, is that a challenge that can be overcome, or do we just kind of stick with the?
Well, there's a lot in your question.
Sure.
And there are many implications of your question that I would not discuss
Right.
in my capacity as the CEO of Integrus Holdings. I will simply answer your question
Sure.
by saying that one has to have a clear strategy behind socially responsible activities.
Sure.
One has to have a clear understanding and definition internally of what that includes and what it doesn't include.
Right.
one has to remember that corporate money is not personal money.
True.
And from the perspective of if we are using corporate funds to support a particular activity or a particular organization, at the end of the day, those funds belong to the shareholders.
Right.
Therefore, those funds and the use of those funds should in some way inure to the benefit of the shareholders.
Right.
Otherwise, we're simply taking their money
Sure.
and giving it to things that make us feel good.
That's
So again, this goes back to the notion of enlightened self-interest,
Right.
that from the perspective of the business, doing good things also helps the business do well. Whatever the personal interests are of a particular employee,
or anybody.
that
yeah.
employee, but you asked it within the
That's true.
context
That's true.
of corporate giving programs and how employees feel about them. Whatever an employee wants to donate to, an employee ought to donate to, and their particular motives and objectives in doing that are personal to them.
Right.
So we think about what we support and what we don't support through the filter of how does it accomplish the goals and objectives of the business. And if you think about it that way, there are certain things that quite obviously are not within the purview of the business.
Absolutely. Or the
we are
government or
not-
any other group of people that.
And we are not a social organization per se.
Right.
We're an organization that exists within society that has certain, in our view, responsibilities within that society, but we're not a social club, right? So,
Right. No, we're not.
So from
Yeah.
that perspective, when you think about it in those terms, it becomes pretty obvious the kinds of things that make sense and the kinds of things that don't.
Sure.
The other thing that we use is we have several very clear types of organizations that we will support.
Sure.
So for example, education.
Right.
We support a lot of things around education. Why? How is that in
Well,
our
good.
interest?
I'm a big fan of education.
Well, and how is that in our interest to do? Well, I go back to a few things. One, you talked earlier about the difficulty of finding qualified people
Sure.
in the economy taken as a whole. Why is that? What does that say about the creation of human capital in our current environment?
Right.
In my view, we're challenged in that regard. We're challenged in that regard as a society. So businesses need to sit up and take notice. And if we want a business in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, we've got to have great people.
Right.
So therefore, it's the right thing, and it is enlightened self-interest
Sure.
to support educational programs, because those programs will create the next generation of people who are ready and able to step into the economy, to continue household formation, to continue to keep the fabric of our society whole, without which we have no economy and we have no
That's right.
business. So from that perspective, we identify education as a vector that lines up with what we're trying to accomplish from a business perspective, and that is a good thing for us to be doing. So to your point, I think that corporations should be thoughtful. They should they should create a rubric that is behind their giving programs to avoid the reality or the appearance of being arbitrary, capricious, or parochial in
Right,
the kinds
right,
of
right.
things that they do.
Makes perfect sense.
So, and a lot of that's about communication, and setting clear expectations so people know what the rules are, so to speak, what the parameters are, and then people can choose to be a part of that organization
Sure.
or not.
So one last question. I ask everybody this same question. What are you reading now? What's your
I'm flipping back and forth among a few things. I recently discovered P.G. Wodehouse.
P.G. Wodehouse?
P.G. Wodehouse. He was a British
Oh,
author.
the author P.G.
And
Wodehouse.
actually, I discovered him because when my son was writing his thesis in English class last year, the professor specifically forbade any papers on P.G. Wodehouse. So, why?
Why?
So,
That's
he was an interesting fellow. If you've ever heard of Jeeves, so Jeeves was a
Okay.
character that was created by
Okay.
P.G. Wodehouse. Wodehouse wrote about the interwar period, sort of the vestiges of Victorian
Oh, sure.
society, but very, very funny. It really captures the essence of a particular time. Alas, he did not end up terribly well and was accused of being a spy for the Germans, which could be why he fell out of favor after World War II.
Just possible.
But amusing,
Maybe a connection there. Right?
amusing and fun to read. Also reading Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life.
12 Rules, yeah.
Definitely enjoying that. Those are the two main things.
Whenever I hear his name, I automatically, I put my shoulders back. That's the first rule, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I ignored it at my peril, which is why I still slouch to the eye.
Well, Scott, I really have enjoyed talking to you.
It's always a
And,
pleasure.
thanks so much for coming.
My
And
pleasure.
and you guys, thanks for listening, and go have a conversation.